Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. And today I am here with Jacqueline Sperling, who is a clinical psychologist, faculty at Harvard Medical School, and is the co-founder and director of training and research at McLean Anxiety Mastery Program at McLean Hospital. A mouthful, but really impressive and really valuable for us. She's also the author of Find Your Fears: How to Put Social Anxiety in Its Place, which is particularly relevant right now and why it's so important for us to have this conversation with you. Dr. Sperling specializes in implementing evidence-based treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy and working with youth who present with anxiety disorders and/or obsessive compulsive disorder. She also focuses on providing parent guidance by using treatments such as behavioral parent training to help families address children's internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So thanks so much for being here with us. And let's just start with, what is the distinction between internalizing and externalizing behaviors?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. Internalizing behaviors, thinking about for those who are experiencing things that you might not see on the outside. So it might be symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety. Externalizing behaviors are more the ones that might be disruptive in the classroom in terms of, or at home as well, that might be acting out, difficulty following rules, noncompliance.
Okay, so, it's such a crazy time right now. I mean, it's so stupid to say it because we've said it 8 billion times in the last year and a half, but we're kind of like at this point where people are considering reentry, and that's not going smoothly for some people. So if you have a kid who kind of cocooned in a way that made them feel safer, do you let them dictate the pace of reentry, or is there a healthy, nudging?
Anxiety certainly can take over the whole household and feel like it's just bossing everyone around. And my suggestion would be to collaborate with the child and come up with a plan for ways to gradually re-enter in a way that feels approachable. And at the same time, I think parents don't have to feel completely beholden to that plan. They also can shape the environment and adjust the environment so that it makes the environment less cozy for anxiety if the child were to avoid. For example, that might mean no access to screens if a child is avoiding school. But I think ultimately involve the child in the discussion, come up with a way to maybe gradually re-enter so that they can focus on the present moment and learn that they can handle it. If a parent just forces them to go and says, you're going, they might white knuckle through the experience and not be able to focus on the present moment and learn that they can do it. So I think it's important for children to be involved in the discussion, and at the same time, parents to feel empowered that they can also adjust the environment as well.
So I want to address two things you said. So one is the idea that anxiety is kind of like a being. It's like it has a space in your family. So I want to do that one, but I also don't want to forget, which I will. You mentioned something about taking screens away. So I just want to address that a little bit more. How does that look for a teenager who has the option of learning from home and needs the screen? Or we all need the screen, right? To a certain amount. So can we start with the first one, that anxiety is going to be pervasive if one kid suffers from it? If your teenager suffers from it, the whole family suffers?
Oh, sure. And I think I like to externalize anxiety from the child, separate it from the child, they're not one and the same. And also, so, because parents understandably very frustrated, but the anxiety is demanding, they might associate that with their child. So I'm just saying to separate that. And also for children to feel like they're not their anxiety, right? There's so much more. But anxiety, when a child's in distress, this treatment goes against all parental instincts, right? And so when a child's in distress, it makes so much sense that you want to make them feel better. So maybe you take responsibilities off the table or remove the things that are stressing them out so that they don't have to do them. But ultimately, that unfortunately reinforces or strengthens the anxiety because it teaches the brain that they can't do it, that they're helpless, or that there's actually a safety threat if they're avoiding an experience. So I understand anxiety can be very bossy. It can make a lot of demands. For certain rituals have to be a certain way, and it can create a lot of frustration. And, also it can demand a lot of attention, and siblings may notice that as well.
So, I love that visual of it, being there, but most of us don't know how to do anything to take that out of being the center. Do you have recommendations? Are there things we can do?
Well, certainly parents are not alone. This is a very common experience, unfortunately, even more common right now. We have a second pandemic right now, a mental health pandemic. There are resources. There are books that parents can read. There are also organizations that have resources online that parents can read. There are also mental health providers that can provide additional support. And if parents are looking for additional support, pediatricians often may be a person they could ask for referrals.
And what about just giving us like what could I do differently today if the house is being driven by the anxiety?
Well, I would in terms of like coming up with a plan with your child that where they can gradually face their fears and they're involved in the discussion, recognizing that anxiety has been really bossy, but how can we create opportunities for you to feel more in charge? Right. And so then they can come up and call like a bravery ladder or fear hierarchy at the top of the things they fear the most and at the bottom of the things they fear the least. And they can put certain experiences on there and pick something, maybe one thing per day that they can approach to experience that's match and realize that they can do it and work their way up the ladder.
And the rest of the family not being dictated by that anxiety.
So there's a multi-pronged approach. I would not be able to be a short answer for this, but I would say some multiple interventions would be involved. But one thing I also tell parents that like any reward system that you're using for your child working on for anxiety, I suggest implementing a reward system for other children so that they don't become resentful. Everybody has room for growth. We're all working on things that maybe that they're working on something different, but they can, receive rewards. And it's not necessarily things that cost money. It could be like, privileges of picking what's for dinner or something like that. And one intervention that we also talk about is having parents spend individual, one-on-one time with their child. They're reallocating attention away from the anxiety and spending it with their child instead. And I would suggest doing that with each child in the household too, so that they can get undivided attention. And what this looks like is that it's a minimum of 5 minutes per day. It can be the same time each day. It doesn't get taken away no matter how the anxiety behaves earlier in the day. Children are in control, any activity they want, they can make up the rules. It just doesn't involve screens, so it's an interactive activity. And parents are spending time praising, providing positive reinforcement, not making commands or asking questions. As kids get older, it's developmentally appropriate to want to spend less time with their parents, so they can say no thank you, but it's just something to offer some individual time one-on-one with each children so that they feel like they're getting some attention as well.
I love that, like not singling the kid out for the rewards or whatever system you come up with in your house, but making it a family thing. I think that's really important because that's what, we tend to like get sucked into the thing that requires the most attention. And this is like, okay, but let me keep in mind, let's make this a family thing. So I think that's great. Okay, so in terms of taking screens away from teenagers, so first of all, Amy points out that during COVID, that was just an impossibility. And actually in life, it's fairly difficult with teenagers to make that a thing. But maybe you had some other ideas about what you meant in terms of that.
Oh yes, and it's a subtle word difference, but makes a difference for teens too. Is that you're not taking them away. Screens are a privilege that are earned. I know right now many often feel like it's an appendage or an unalienable right, and it's a given for them, but they're not. They're actually privileges. Parents are required to give food, clothing, and shelter. Things above that are privileges. And it may be that, that doesn't have to happen for every household that they earn them, they earn access to their screens for this contingent on certain behaviors. But parents may find that, going to school full time that's how you might earn your screen time in the afternoon or something like that. And if not, you can try again the next day. They're not taking anything away, but that might make it more motivating for them in terms of like if that's something that's motivating for them to approach a fear behavior, a feared situation.
Okay, so you segued into my next question, which is like kids who are well, I mean, there's a little bit of a distinction here. So there are some kids who are thriving learning at home and not because there's something underlying. And then there are some kids who are more fearful of going back to school because of anxiety. So if you're talking about the kid that's fearful to go back to school and either you don't think it's a good idea or it's not a possibility because you have to work, how do you how do we do that? I mean, they've had a long time at home to like kind of build this relationship with school at home.
Unfortunately, they've had an extended period of time more than that, without opportunities to practice approaching situations. So I think it's probably going to take a gradual approach for them to ease their way in to this new experience compared to what they have been experiencing. I'm of the mindset that I would encourage children to approach the feared situation. Avoidance temporarily can reduce distress, but unfortunately, it just strengthens or reinforces the anxiety. So what I'd suggest is sitting down with your child. Again, you can create a ladder there where maybe it's like, what class feels the most approachable? Maybe they start with that, add on another class, and work with the school. And then the schools maybe so they can collaborate. If the child feels like it's going to feel, insurmountable to attend a full day of school just yet, or homework, then see if they can find a way to gradually ease their way in to make it more feasible.
Okay, so there's a lot of discussion about screens going on because that is so difficult for us right now. So I'm going to get to those in a little bit, but I'm going to go through some more of these questions first. So if I'm really new to a kid with anxiety, like I haven't yet gone for intervention from either for my kid or for myself, do I, and you alluded to it before, but it's kind of like, do you starve that need or do you feed that need? So if the kid says, I'm too scared, I can't do that, do you do it for them, or do you kind of dig your heels in and say, well, then it won't get done? What's healthy?
Well, that's a really good question. As I said, like, this treatment goes against all parental instincts, right? If someone's talking to you, you want to answer a question, or they're asking you to do something, you want to do something, they're distressed, you want to help them. But to separate, is it the anxiety talking to them or is it the child talking to them, right? And so we want to give lots of attention to the child and not attention to the anxiety. Anxiety, for example,
What
like,
does that mean? What does that mean?
attention to a child or not the anxiety, you mean?
Yeah. What does that look like?
So, for example, anxiety often will seek reassurance. So like for a child who is afraid of vomiting, they might say, like, do I look sick? Do you think I'm going to throw up? Is that going to make me sick? Or if they're afraid of going to some place, like, who's going to be there? Do you know what time we're going to be back? And they ask questions over and over and over again. If they don't know the answer to something, they're asking a question, you can answer once. But what they often find is that anxiety is not satisfied with just one response, and it will ask over and over and over again. Unfortunately, that no matter how many times you respond, it's like filling a water bottle with holes at the bottom. That water bottle is never going to fill up. And what you want to do is, you don't want to feed the anxiety, but unfortunately, I would think you do it in a gradual way. So we have when I say we at our program, we do a 3-step hierarchy. And I involve the child in the discussion, and parents can do this at home too, just saying that we're going to gradually take attention away from the anxiety because I want to support you. I often will use a garden analogy to describe this. So I'll say, if a child has a favorite flower, they can pick it. But for brevity's sake, I'll just say a rose. A rose takes just the right amount of sunlight, water, nutrients to thrive. Dandelions, you blink and like they're all over your garden. They take very little attention, right, to thrive. They don't need much. And so we like to think of these unhelpful behaviors and anxiety-making demands as like the dandelions. We don't want to water the weeds. We want to water the rose, the behaviors of which we'd like to see more, help our children thrive. And so using this analogy so they understand, like, we want to water the rose, right, not the dandelions. We're going to gradually take attention away from the dandelions. And there's 3 steps, and we'll gradually work our way up to the top. You get to pick which step with which we start, giving them some sense of control. What it looks like, the first step is, so every time the anxiety asks a question, like, do I look sick? You might say, that sounds like your anxiety talking. Is that your anxiety talking? Child can say yes, no, maybe, whatever. And you still answer, no, you don't look sick. So you're still providing the reassurance, but you're cueing the brain that it's the anxiety talking and not the child. The next level would be no words, just gestures. So, do I look sick? If it's a yes question, you can nod your head. Sometimes with OCD, they might have confession, so just announce things over and over again. So it's not a yes or no question, but you can do the okay gesture. Now, I want to acknowledge that there are some groups in the States right now that are trying to usurp this gesture with a negative intention. That's not intention to use, meaning for the A-OK, meaning here. So no words, no response, but you're gradually pulling attention away from the dandelions. The next level is what we call active ignoring. Eye contact, no words, pick the lint off your shirt, count the ceiling tiles, Swiffer, pay your bills, do anything other than respond to the anxiety. But you might start with one level, practice it for a week, and then check in with the child and say, hey, what do you think about moving to the next level? So you're gradually pulling attention away from anxiety. One thing just to warn parents, by the way, is something called an extinction burst. So when you start taking attention away from the dandelions, they're like bullies. They're used to being in charge. It's not like you say, today I'm not going to give you lunch money, and the bully's like, all right, see you later. It's going to put up a fight. So there's something called an extinction burst. When you start taking attention away, things will get worse before they get better. You might see an increase in the reassurance seeking, probably means you're on track. The key is to remain consistent, and then eventually you might see it peter out.
Oh my God, I love your answer and I'm tortured by it. Like the idea that, that people would literally just turn away, I think it's so hard for us to do. So if we're desperate right now, like you're here listening and you're thinking, well, I'll try anything, but this one sounds horrible. When can you see, is there any immediate gratification as a parent that it's working, that it's changing something?
Well, I think, first of all, and totally, this tugs at the heartstrings. The parent's like, I feel like the worst parent. And the thing is, when you feel like the worst parent, you're likely being the best parent, because remember, you're not watering the dandelions, right? We don't want to water the weeds. That's not your child talking to you. They're very good at masking themselves to look like the rose, but it's not the rose. You want to also find other opportunities in the day to water the rose, like that one-on-one time, or find opportunities to praise your child in ways where they're being helpful, kind, respectful, any other way that's not giving them attention that's focused to their struggles. And to know that that's where you're watering the rose. So it's not like you're taking all attention away altogether. You're reallocating it. And so I think that's really key. And then the child's involved in the process, right? So they understand and they're separating it, that it's not, this is the dandelions talking.
And like, do parents report that they see a shift in their kid? Sometimes, always, never? Like,
Oh, thank you for it. And kids will often say, like, first of all, that first level, they're like, that one sounds so irritating. No, thank you. And sometimes they'll start with the second one. And when parents will just say, like, I already know what you're going to say. I'm just not going to ask it anyway. And so they realize it. So then they're like, oh, you know what? That's my anxiety. I don't need to ask it. So they do tend to see it peter out. At first, they might put up a fight, but I think that can be very reinforcing for the parents once they start to see, oh my gosh, it's working.
yeah.
And that can be very strengthening. And then, like, the kid feels very good about themselves too, right? That they feel very empowered. Like, hey, I caught myself. I had that thought. I didn't ask you.
That's great. And can you, like, is that something to acknowledge? Well, look at how great that was that you didn't give into that.
Oh, totally. But it's like, wow, look at you being able to resist the urge and catch yourself when that was anxiety and not you. Absolutely. Reinforce all the brave efforts. Key thing there is to reinforce effort and not necessarily outcome. If someone tried and it didn't go as they would plan, still really praise the effort. That's really brave.
I mean, I just love the analogy. I think it's so easy to remember. It's really brilliant. Okay, so now let's move into like a kid who's been socially isolated, which is presumably most of our kids, although as people in the comments are suggesting, like some of them made up for that using their screens, and it was satisfying for them. But for the kids who really felt isolated and it kind of fed their nature, more likely an introvert who kind of said, this isn't really so bad, and their world opens up a little bit. How do we not kind of, I mean, is it important for us to let them be them? Or is it also important for us to nudge them back into, like a social world for them?
I mean, we don't need to, if our child doesn't feel necessarily comfortable being like the life of the party, we don't need to have them play that role. But we do want to have experiences of mastery and doing what's important to them and what they also need to do, right? Going to school, activities that they enjoy, anything that's important to them, and that's part of their values. So what I would do is also, again, a gradual approach, involve them in the discussion, create opportunities for them to practice. It doesn't mean that they go like straight to a larger picnic gathering. Maybe they can pick a couple friends with whom they feel more comfortable, with whom they'd be willing to start socializing. They can do it in a socially distanced way outside. And then maybe you have them extend the amount of time they're with those friends, and or maybe start interacting with some peers they don't know as well, to give them additional practice of being in the classroom and interacting with their peers there. Because that's ultimately what the children are tasked to do, right? Their full-time job is to be at school, and we want to set them up for success that way. Even if they may identify that like they don't want to, they don't their cups aren't filled by hanging out with a bunch of people all day long, but we want to be able to do what they need to do.
Oh, what a weird, weird time. Okay, Amy has made a number of comments, but this one I'm going to share it up here. So they're no longer annoying you with their anxious questions, but are they gone, or are you leaving them to deal with it alone? Which is, of course, the worst. I mean, we just feel awful about that.
So really good question. As I said, this is all the treatment for this is multi-pronged approach. It's not just addressing the parents' response. It's that we also want to equip children with skills as well. And so they may learn, as you're giving them opportunities for mastery, they're learning that they can handle it. They're learning to separate themselves from their anxiety. There are also tools, cognitive behavioral therapy, where they can learn to boss back those thoughts, find other ways of thinking about situations. So there are ways to empower children with tools, but also to let parents feel that they are empowered as well, that they can adjust the environment, and that can help support their children and not the anxiety.
Great. Okay, this is my last question for you. This has been a time of so much hand washing and germs and so many other behaviors that maybe if you had OCD before you were already engaged in, but now you got kind of reinforced and even applauded for doing that. So it might be particularly difficult for those kids to ease off some of those behaviors. Should we worry about that?
For children with OCD, whether it's contamination fears or any other type of obsessions that they might have, know that there's support for them. There are mental health clinicians available. Again, you can contact pediatrician to get support. There is treatment that can help. One thing of note is that, for the treatment for the contamination fears, typically what one would do is that you would not only have them practice the everyday. So if someone has a ritual where they have to wash their hands 10 times after they touch a surface, right? The everyday might be, as CDC is saying, wash your hands for 20 seconds. Well, typically before the pandemic, we would also create opportunities, what we call overlearning, like going above and beyond the everyday in the extreme to teach your brain that you can handle it even then, and to give your brain room to kind of drift back. As humans, we always drift back to the everyday, because we just did with the everyday, they would drift back to the OCD. So what do I mean by that? Before the pandemic, it might have been like gradually working your way up to not washing your hands after you go to the bathroom and eating a snack with your hands. I imagine parents would be like, what? I have worked years to get my kids to implement proper hygiene. But right now, with the pandemic, with kids with contamination fears, what we're doing is not necessarily doing the overlearning exposures, but helping them practice at least the everyday. So not reducing it to the 20 seconds after the surface that they touch, and when they might need to wash hands, like after they go to the bathroom, before they eat a meal, and not after every additional surface touch within their household.
Okay, these were such good suggestions. I want to just put one up because it feels a little bit like a victory that maybe all of us can hope for. 16-year-old with severe anxiety went back to school in October, was so much better after that. Now starting first job on Friday. Glad they are starting to branch out and spread wings. Shelley, thanks so much for sharing. I feel like it's so hopeful for the rest of us. So, Jackie, any parting words?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say that we recognize that not only is there a COVID pandemic, there also is a mental health pandemic, and that it's very common right now. I know that there are services that can support your children and your families, that you don't have to go through this alone. It's, people may see people wear glasses to help with their vision, or insulin pumps to help regulate their insulin, but people don't often know that someone is struggling with anxiety because they're often good at masking it. And so families can feel very alone and isolated. Know that you're not. There are support groups for parents often in communities. There are resources to help you and help your family.
And pediatrician is a great first place to go, or
the first place to go. There are other resources like ADAA .org is for parents. There's one there for kids with OCD. There's the IOCDF.org, different resources. NAMI, NAMI, resources there. You might find some local parent groups as well.
Excellent. Okay, Stephanie says your voice is so soothing, and I have to agree with her. It's really good to hear this from you. So, Jacqueline Sperling, thank you so much for being here with us. Thanks for sharing your great advice.